A warm welcome to this year's first MBT Volunteer Q&A. Campbell and Vanessa Wiedeski, and of course, all our lovely MBT volunteers. I think we have a special welcome to you who recently joined our community. My name is Titi Nordjeng, and I'm also the facilitator of this community. And I hope that you all agree that with me that it will be fun getting together like this and having the unique opportunity to ask Tom about anything. So before I hand over to Tom and Vanessa, why don't we open the chat here in Zoom and spend a few minutes just saying hello to each other. You may want to share where you're calling from and even a little greeting. And while you do that, I will also share a message to our coming YouTube listener. So if you are watching this on YouTube and you think that it would be fun to join our MBT volunteer community and contribute to our common work, which is all about sharing the MBT messages, then send an email to mbtvolunteers@gmail.com. We work with MBT branding, social media, web development, video timestamping, and much more. Right now, we are particularly looking for experts on online marketing and people who'd like to share the MBT messages in a soft and nudging way on social media. So yeah, maybe you would like to say a few words, Tom, and then we can kick off the Q&A.
Well, what I would like to say is this is the volunteer group, and you're the people that make all of what we do possible. So I want to thank all of you, not only for coming here and taking part in this, but just for all the things you do, all the wonderful time you put in and effort that you go to on the behalf of MBT and me. I really, really do appreciate that. MBT would not be where it is now if it were not for you and others like you that volunteer their time to make this message available to other people. So we're here for a little 2 hours, I think, of Q&A, and there is no subject that's off the table. You can ask anything you like, and I'll answer it any way I like, and that should work just fine. So let's just open it up to questions. And as long as we have questions, we'll just keep going till 2 o'clock.
Fantastic. That sounds great. Thanks, Tom. So Seabrant, you're up first with your question.
Thank you, Vanessa. Hello, Tom. Can you hear me?
I hear you fine.
Thank you. Yeah, I have a question more out of curiosity than anything else, and that's about other VRs. Our VR was created by the digital Big Bang, and the initial conditions plus Rousseau, and it evolved to the universe we have right now, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
I was wondering about other VRs. They are obviously not in our universe, then we would call them aliens, but they are in a different reality frame, right?
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering, are these VRs created in the same way by the LCS, also by a digital Big Bang, and were they evolved also? Or are there also VRs that be programmed by the LCS? Or I was just wondering about other VRs and how they were created by the LCS.
Okay. There's lots of different kinds of VRs out there, and a VR is simply just it's a data stream that you get that allows you to experience. Okay, if you're in A VR has a rule set, and the rule set defines what experiences you can have.
Right.
Okay. Now, the very first VR that the larger conscious system created was no more than just communication protocols for all the individuated units of consciousness so that they could all communicate with each other, because that's a rule set. You know, communication protocols form a rule set of how you can communicate, what things mean, you know, syntax, vocabulary, all that's the rules. Some VRs are like ours. They have a very strong rule set, such that everything we do has causality in the rules. You know, we can find out how the rules allow this, you know, or this is caused according to the rule set. And in those, I think most all of them, if not all of them, are created the same way that ours was. They start with initial conditions and a rule set, and they just let it evolve. Now, getting those initial conditions and rule set to produce something that's stable is not an easy thing to do. You know, it's something that, you know, as we know, it takes a lot of trial and error to find just the right combination of initial conditions and rules so that you end up with something that's stable for a long time. So most of the physical like, and we'll just call those physical, you know, virtual realities because they seem physical, the rule sets are so tight. I think they are created just like ours was, because that is the most efficient way to do it. You know, from a computer science viewpoint, trying to program a reality like ours that has that much detail in it is just impossible. You know, way too much detail to do. So letting it evolve is the natural way. And of course, you have the advantage then that everything there just evolves by itself. It's not like a programmer has to keep up with, you know, all the new things that are going on. It just happens the way it happens and evolves on its own, which means everything's self-consistent. If you go back in history, there are no big places where there's, you know, big logical disruptions or something in the process flow where a programmer, you know, decided to change the way he did something or other. Everything seems continuous and connected. So that's the advantage of having it just evolve on its own. But now there's also a lot of virtual, probably more virtual realities, many more, that don't have a tight rule set. They are there for their own particular reasons, I guess. And for one simple version would be just a single player game that we call an out-of-body experience.
Or dream reality.
Yeah, so you latch onto this other rule set, and now it's just you really in a larger consciousness system. It's sending you a rule set on some sort of an adventure or experience or connection, and it's doing it to give you opportunities to learn in a different way than you could learn here, different choices than what would happen here. But that's also a virtual reality. You know, it's you're experiencing, and there's rules. Certain things can happen, certain things do happen, and there's rules. And there's language, there's communication. So in general, consciousness is the only thing that's fundamental, and everything else is virtual. So any reality that you're in which you can experience, if you can experience in that reality, it's a virtual reality, because experience requires rules. It requires context for the experience. So you can't even experience a conversation until you have rules that define the language, you see? So everything that we can experience is a virtual reality. That's, so yes, and those are not evolved. Those virtual realities, the system just creates. You might say it programs them. So my out-of-body reality doesn't evolve from anything. It's just it's just a set of code that the system just says, all right, let's send you this. You know, sense. But they're limited. They're not, you know, they're not big, massive things like our universe. You know, they're very limited things, and those are things that are created on the fly by the larger conscious system. Now, we are a piece of consciousness, and we can do pretty much everything that consciousness can do. We can do it. We just do it with a smaller capacity than the larger consciousness system. So we can create a virtual reality too. And we call that, you know, a daydream and sometimes a night dream. You know, we're creating our own virtual reality, and we can give it a rule set. And if we want to fly in, you know, or teleport in our virtual reality, well, we can do that. We allow ourselves to do that sort of thing. But still, we have certain kinds of rules. Otherwise, if you didn't have rules, everything would be random. And if everything was random, it wouldn't make any sense. There wouldn't be any information. So we can create virtual realities as well with our own, you know, consciousness. So it's just a thing that consciousness can do. So the answer to it is, you know, all of the above. There's some smaller realities that are just, and some are functional, like the transition reality. You know, we talk about when you die, you go to transition. That's just a virtual reality. That doesn't have a tight rule set. That's, you know, you can blink in and out of that, you know, kind of at will. It's not a place like the physical reality at all. It's another virtual reality. So we have consciousness that's fundamental, and everything else is a virtual reality. The ones that seem physical are usually evolved. And for that reason, they're similar in the sense that it's really hard to get a virtual reality to be balanced and to exist for the long term. So once you have something that works, you tend to start with that and maybe make variations on it. And the thing that's different is what the evolution produces. That's what's different.
Yeah.
So the evolution may produce different kinds of creatures and different kinds of things, but basically the initial conditions in the rule set are going to be pretty similar, because you just can't take any old rule set and any old initial conditions and produce a reality that's stable for 5 billion years. That will produce avatars that are worth it, you know, logging on to.
Right. And are all the VRs, evolved VRs, created for the same reason as an entropy reduction trainer kind of thing, or to let the LCS experiences itself with consequences? Is that what?
Yeah, that's right. They're all for the really same reason. They're all entropy reduction trainers. It's all there. And yes, and we can also call that, it's letting the LCS experience itself. But if it experiences itself in a way that it creates us with individual free will, it's just a part of itself, you know, a virtual machine inside of a larger machine. And then it can give us environments that challenge us. But yes, it's all part of the system evolving itself. And we're just part of that evolution.
Okay, Tom, thanks very much.
Great question. Thanks, Brandt. Over to Linda for the next question.
Thank you, Vanessa. Hi, Tom.
Hello.
My question pertains to a recent, in the last few months, interview you did with Bernardo Castro. And near the end, you were talking about a paradigm shift from materialism to idealism. Do I have that right?
That's correct.
And so I discussed this with my local MBT group because I really didn't know what was meant by idealism. And what they told me is that consciousness is fundamental. Is that right?
Yes, that's basically, well, that's maybe some idealists would come up with something else, but that's really, as far as MBT goes, that's what makes us idealists, yes, is that consciousness is fundamental.
So my question sort of pertains to Richard Gordon and the documentary that he's in the process of making right now. Because I understand the premise of his documentary is What if a paradigm shift happens before the world is ready for it? And I don't know, I haven't really formulated the question really well, but it's Bernardo and you and Idealism and Richard Gordon. And is the world ready for, well, no, I don't want to say it like that. What do you imagine the repercussions could be if this were to take place before the world was ready for it?
Well, one good thing is that it doesn't really take place, or it really can't take place until the world is almost ready for it, or at least potentially ready for it. So as long as we are still full of fear and cannot process it, cannot deal with it, it's just out of our reality to be kind to people just because that's nice. That's you only interact with people in as much as what can I get, what can they do for me. If we're still in that mindset, then it won't happen. So it only happens when we change to the point that we can entertain bigger pictures and bigger ideas and ideas of love and compassion and cooperation. When that becomes wide enough spread, then things start to happen. So it remains in the margins, which is what it has been for, human beings have been walking around as Homo sapiens for about 200,000 years. And for those 200,000 years, all of them except maybe the last 100 or so, we haven't progressed much. We've been pretty hard-headed and not very grown up. But in the last few hundred years, I even say as long as 500 years, we've been growing up and we've been changing. Life is a lot better now than it was 500 years ago. Life was real cheap in those days. There wasn't a whole lot of caring on a broad scale. There was individually in families, but on a broad scale, there was very little of that. All of our social organization was in the lines of the warlord mentality. Someone who had all the power was in charge and made all the rules. Everybody else had to obey the rules or deal with the consequences. And we're getting away from that, and we have been now for some time. Now we haven't gotten to the point yet, though, that we're ready to create this big paradigm shift, but we're inching up on it. We're getting ready, and now that we have humanity as a community, and that's something that the internet has done. Now we have a situation where probably over half the population of the world is on the net. We're connected with each other. Probably more than half of the people in the world are on the net. So what that does is make us more of a community. If you go back even just 100 years ago, when there was a earthquake, in someplace else, and we'd say, oh yeah, we hear that they had an earthquake and 100,000 people were killed. Oh, that's too bad. We didn't have any connection to it. It was just something that happened in some place, and most of us didn't even know where that someplace was on a map. We wouldn't even be able to find it. Just 100 years ago or so. And now that's not true. Now we hear about it, we see it, we watch people going through it. We can look in their faces, we can see the expressions on their face, and that makes it so much more real, and makes it so much more likely that we'll have empathy or sympathy, or send some of our resources, to organizations that are helping them and that sort of thing. So this connectedness is growing. And as that happens, that gives us bigger picture. We don't see ourselves as just an isolated, little group of people. If we go back 100 years, you'll find out that very few people, ever got further than, about 100 miles from where they were born. They were born there, grew up there, worked there, died there. Well, that's not true anymore. You know, people are traveling all over because we have airplanes that put us from one side of the world to the other in less than a day. So all of the technology has been helping us make humanity into a single tribe, into, you know, people we care about. Now, we're just starting down that path. You know, 100 years isn't very long. You know, 100 years is a very short period of time. So particularly 100 years out of 200,000, you know, that's it's an eye blink. But we're heading in that direction. And now I see in our culture lots and lots of people who are talking about bigger ideas, like, you know, the talk with Bernardo. You know, he is talking about idealism, and a lot of other people talk about idealism, and that was given its name back in Plato's time. And it was the idealists who said, this world that you see is not exactly what's most real. It's just a shadow of the real world. You know, in the Buddha's word, this is all an illusion. You know, this is not what's real. Well, Plato said the same thing with his cave allegory. Oh, what we think's the world is just like shadows on the cave wall. So we've had this idea that what is fundamental is not the physical. So that's been called idealism. Things are, you know, it's like in the real world, we don't have perfect circles. A perfect circle is just a mathematical thing. It's an ideal thing. So it started with sort of with mathematics. You know, it was called ideal. So in the world that's really fundamental, you have perfect circles. You have, you know, everything's ideal. And then we have this world that is not. The opposite to that is realism. Realism says what you see is all there is. The physical is it. There's nothing besides the physical. So those two have been competing with each other since, I don't know, probably, you know, 500 or 600 BC, you know, those two concepts. And the philosophers have been arguing with each other without a whole lot of success right up until the early 1920s, when the double slit experiment was done. And when that was done, that was the key that the idealists were right and the realists were wrong. Because from a realist viewpoint, that all there is this physical world. From a viewpoint of materialism, which is physicalism, which is the reality group, or the realist group, what happens in the double slit is just impossible. It just can't happen. There is no physical explanation. It has no physical causality, but it happens anyway. And you can repeat that experiment as many times as you like, as many places, and it's always the same. There is no physical causality for what happens. Well, that tells us then that this world is not just physical. There's something else going on besides just the physical. So that was really the first piece of scientific information that said the idealists were right and the realists were not. And since then, of course, there's been many other experiments in quantum physics besides the double slit that keep saying the same thing, you know, keep making the same point over and over again. And I have a few experiments that are also going to make that point, you know, in my own way. So that's kind of what the idealism and material, you know, versus materialism is. And it's had thousands of philosophers over the millennia arguing on both sides of it. So it's a real big thing in philosophy. And I guess there are some that don't accept the idea that because there's no material causality that you know, the materialists are wrong. But I think that's a fact. That's clear enough. It's like that. So anyway, are we ready? Is your question? And not yet, but I think we will be in the near future, because I think this the fact that we have communications now means that big ideas don't stay just in the margins. You know, we've had a lot of people who have had big ideas. It's not, you know, it's not just new happening now that we have a lot of people with bigger ideas. The idealists, like I say, go back to, I don't know how many, probably 500 or 600 years BC. So people have been aware, and the Buddha goes back to about 2,500 years ago, where he said this was all an illusion. You know, what was really important was love and caring and compassion and that sort of thing. But all these ideas have hung out in the margins. They've not been mainstream. The mainstream has always said, yeah, that's a nice idea, but you know, it's not going to help me find something to eat. So it's not important. So it's just always been in the margins. And now I think that's not the case. We can see now all the dysfunction we have. And if we, you know, I think if you did a survey amongst all the people on the planet, you'd find that most people agree that our world is dysfunctional, that it could be a lot better. It's not optimized. We've got a lot of unpleasant, negative, wrong things going on here that we should change, but nobody has a clue how to go about doing that, because still the people, the humans, have a pretty low quality of consciousness. So, you know, it's hard to change that. You know, it's hard to get a bunch of 6-year-olds to act like adults. It's just really hard. They just have to grow up. You know, they're not going to act like adults. Even if you have adults around and say, boy, it sure would be nice if all these kids would act like adults. It's just not going to happen. You have to let them grow up. So they're going to squabble and fight and grab each other's toys and, you know, run with scissors and do all the other things that kids do that adults wish they wouldn't, but they do anyway. But now I think the possibility for them growing up in the mainstream is in the near future. So no, we're not ready yet. But when we are ready, that means enough of us are ready that we can make that change. We can begin that change. If just 10% of the people on the planet changed and grew up and could walk away from their fears and were considerate and cooperative and whatever, that would make a huge difference, just 10%, because that 10% would be such a good example and would have smiles on their face and be happy and live lives of joy. And that would trigger, you know, growth all over the place, because people would say, you know, I'd like to be like that. I'd like to live with happiness instead of, you know, misery and pain and frustration. So just 10% might be enough. So we don't have to wait till everybody's there. We just have to wait till there's enough there that they can eventually win the rest over. And I think we're getting close to that point because of the internet, because of our communications, because of our transportation. We're having bigger pictures and realizing that other people who think and live differently than us are not necessarily wrong. They're just different. And we need to accept those differences as just differences. So I think we're on our way, and we're changing more rapidly over the last 100 years than we had changed in the 199,000 years before that. Just in the last 100 years, we've made more change than we had in all the time before it. So that's good. And I think that rate of change is just going to keep speeding up. Now, we could do something foolish and set ourselves back. You know, evolution doesn't always just march forward. Sometimes it gets set back, but it's very resilient, and it'll come back again, and it'll be easier next time. So I'm thinking 2, 3 decades, 4 decades, probably in this century, we'll get to a point where we'll be ready to get maybe 10 or 15% of us in the world that are on the same sheet of music. So it's just a matter of spreading that word and those ideas so that people see that there is a better way than just control, power, force, which is the is kind of the ethic. That's kind of the coin of the realm now, is control, power, force. And we need to see that's dysfunctional. That's not a good coin. That's not really the way we should be. So we're coming up on it. And no, we're not ready, but we will be. But nothing's going to force us to change until we're ready. So the concept that the change will come and we're not ready, I don't think will happen. The change will only come when enough of us get ready that we can influence the rest. So I don't think it's a problem about not being ready for the change. It won't happen until enough of us are ready to actually start to change everybody else.
That's a wonderful answer.
Thanks. Yeah.
Thanks, Tom. How many of us would you say right now we're on the same sheet of music, as you say?
What, the population in the world?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know. I have no idea, but you know, there's more and more, though. You know, there used to be maybe, even go back 50 years ago, you know, there was maybe a few dozen different groups of people that had, you know, big ideas and had bigger pictures. But now there's literally thousands. You know, there's just thousands of people. You know, there's Vanessa here with low entropy. You know, she's off doing low entropy stuff. And there was Bernardo, and he's off trying to take the realist to task and say that idealism is a better, you know, is more logical. It's a better philosophy. And we could sit down and probably list another 100 or 200 people that are on, you know, the right side of this, that are popular, that have groups that are talking about sharing and caring and you know, raising the quality of their consciousness. They may not use those metaphors, but the metaphors are relevant. It doesn't matter what the metaphor's all about. The metaphors are relevant. You know, we have lots and lots of people from different areas, from different perspectives, heading down this path. And all we have to do is get enough of us that it starts to spread. You know, in physics, that's called a critical mass. You know, once you pass the critical mass, the reaction just takes place on its own. If you don't have a critical mass, the reaction, if you let it alone, will kind of go away, you know, it peters out. But if you got that critical mass, it just, word of mouth just travels, and it's unstoppable. Well, we don't quite have a critical mass yet, but we're working on it. And there's thousands of people who are trying to open people's minds in thousands of different ways. There's all kinds of healing modalities out there that basically use, you know, a focused intent to modify future probability. Now, that's not the way they look at it. You know, that's the way I look at it, but that's what they're doing from my perspective. But there's 100 different ways to do that. So there's lots of different paths. And if you go back 100 years, there was maybe 2 or 3 alternative modalities. And most of them were not in this country. Most of them were in the East someplace, you know, like acupuncture. That's an old modality, but it was in the margins. Now it's even spread here. See how those margins are, you know, kind of spilling outside the margin and spreading around? So yes, I think we're headed in the right direction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're right. There's lots of modalities. There's a book that an MBTer actually recommended to me. It wasn't MBT, but it's called Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. And it's exactly that. It's all about learning how to let go of your fear. Yeah, by Susan Jeffers. Really good book. So speaking of fear, Leo has a question about fear, and I'm going to read the question for him. He says, for the past couple of months, I've been struggling with some fears that arose because of a mental health crisis. What has helped me the most is you, Tom. I was wondering, how is it that you know so much about fear, and why is it that other teachers don't talk so much about this when it's such an important issue?
Well, that's a good question. You know, I think a lot of people have the idea, but they, you know, have the right idea, but they don't really reduce it to fundamentals. You know, they're working at an idea that at a little higher level of you and by higher level, I mean a little further away from being fundamental. You know, so like the positivity course. You know, so he talks about, you know, that what you need to do is be positive. And when, you know, somebody insults you, rather than getting upset and getting negative, you need to be able to deal with that, you know, with positivity. So basically what he's talking about is fear. You know, it's fear does that. When you look at the medical profession, psychiatry, and they have a book that has hundreds and hundreds of defined, you know, mental illnesses, and they define them. And a few of those are physiological, you know, they're physical based, rule set based, but all the rest of them that aren't are all just fear. You know, you take that whole book and all those things and see that every one of them reduces to fear. So my model is just a very basic model. It's very fundamental and looks at things at a very fundamental level. It's like you reduce it all down to the bottom. What are we really talking about here? Well, we're talking about fear versus love for the most part. And that what we need to do is get rid of that fear and become the love. And that's real simple. And everything else is a part of that picture. And we talk about, you know, changing future probability with our intent. And there's 100 other modalities that use that, but they don't really realize it just has that one fundamental idea behind all of them. You know, they like the placebo effect. You know, nobody, you know, everybody understands that. And we know that physicians with good bedside manner and who really care about their patients have their patients get better, you know, more quickly than those that treat their patients like they're just a piece of meat on an assembly line. So we know that how we think and what we believe affects our health, affects other things. But that is applied thousands of places, but nobody really understands the very fundamental thing of what's going on, which is we modify future probability with our intent. So MBT is just about the fundamentals. It's reduced down to the, you know, what's really happening at the bottom. And what's nice about that is that it provides a model that explains everything very simply. You know, the world isn't all that complicated in MBT. The world is really simple. It reduces to just a few simple ideas, and that explains all the rest. Whereas if you're in a world where you have things like, you know, you have paranormal things happening, you have remote viewers, you have mental healers, you have people who prognosticate the future with tea leaves or chicken bones or tarot cards or the planets' positions, and you have all this, and it looks like a very complicated world with all kinds of unusual, unexplainable things in it. You know, and if you look at the basics, then you realize it's not a very complicated world. It's really a very simple world. There's just a few things, a few basic principles, and that explains all the rest of it. So, and the reason I got to that is because I was able to experiment inside of consciousness, and consciousness is what's fundamental. So if you experiment in, you know, trying to understand what consciousness is, well, you're going to come up with fundamental answers because consciousness is fundamental. So that's why I end up with the, you know, at the bottom level of understanding, you know, the basis, the foundation, because my work's about consciousness, and consciousness is the foundation. So that's how that works, Vanessa. It's, you know, the world looks hugely complex and mysterious when you don't understand consciousness.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. And then once you understand it, it's not so difficult to navigate anymore.
No, it's not so difficult to navigate at all. Everything kind of pops out clear, even your own behavior and the results of your behavior. You know, well, you know, why do I have all this pain? You know, why do I have problems with relationships? You know, why am I this or that? And, you know, it all falls out very simple answers. You know, it's fear, ego, belief.
Awesome. Thank you, Tom. Michael, you have a question.
Yes. My question is personal growth related and finding balance between one's inner world and the day-to-day life. Tom, how did you find balance between your meditations or exploring the larger consciousness system and helping others in this reality? Right now, I feel like I get more value out of kind of longer and longer meditation sessions, but I don't want it to overtake the rest of my life. I also sometimes feel like meditating for a long time can kind of become a selfish act. There's only so many hours in a day, so I'm just trying to find balance. I'm wondering if you could comment on that.
Okay, well, it's a personal balance. There is no overall one-size-fits-all recommendation, like, oh, spend 10% of your waking hours meditating. There's nothing like that. It just depends on you. Your work on yourself, your meditation will change you. And then you go out and interact in the world. And that change that you got from the meditation is then, what's the word? It's actualized out in the world. You act according to who you are and how you are. So it all works together. Early on, it's good to spend more time on yourself because yourself needs more time. As you progress and you get rid of a lot of your fear, you spend less time on yourself and more time working with others and helping others. So it just kind of depends on where you are. Now, you have to balance the time in meditation with the time out in the world, applying yourself to the world. You have to balance that so that you optimize the whole. In other words, if you spend too much time in meditation, you won't have the experience to learn. If you spend all your time just out in the world, well, you won't learn because you'll never think the deep thoughts. You'll never understand why. You just are the way you are, and it just happens, but you don't grow any roots. You don't grow any understanding. So you need both of those. So that brings up the idea about the monk or the person who is very spiritual and goes to be a hermit and live in a cave. Okay, so now they spend all their time in the cave by themselves. And by doing that, they can become very spiritual theoretically. They can think all the good thoughts, but put them out into, a busy marketplace, and you'll find they're way out of their depth. They really don't know how to interact. They're socially retarded. They can't deal with people very well because they haven't been practicing dealing with people. They haven't been applying themselves that way. So you got the two things. You've got your inner growth, and then you have the expression of that growth in the world. And those two have to stay balanced. If you do too much of one and not enough of the other, you become unbalanced. So someone in a cave would become unbalanced and probably not nearly as grown as they think. Because often you find those parts of you that aren't grown because somebody challenges you. Somebody does something that presses one of your buttons and you get upset or annoyed or angry or something else, and you realize that that's a fear, the reason you get that way. So you need that outside world to constantly challenge you. And you look at it and say, well, okay, what about the last 3 weeks? Have I ever felt, angry? Have I ever been upset in the last 3 weeks? Have I been annoyed with something? Have I felt abused or not appreciated or those kinds of things, not accepted, anything that's negative, even things have I felt stress and anxiety. And if you have any of those things that are negative, then you have growth, you have growing to do. And by staying in your room in the basement all the time isn't going to help you do those things. You gotta, I guess that's the modern version of the cave, right? Is living in the basement of your house. and never going outside. But you have to balance both of those. And it just depends on where you are. And that balance point will shift from time to time. There'll be times in your life where meditating, 4 hours every day is just perfect. There'll be other times in your life where meditating at all just doesn't seem to happen. You'll go through life and you won't meditate. And you'll think about it and you say, gee, I should. I've kind of lost the bubble there on meditation, but that's normal. You go through periods where you are mostly engaged in the world, gathering experience. And then you go through periods where you're less engaged in the world, where it's more inward work. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's not like every day needs to be balanced. You just need to, in the bigger picture, stay balanced. So sometimes you'll be more one way and sometimes you'll be more the other. I know in my own life, I've gone through periods where, this is a long time ago, I don't really meditate anymore. It's just, I live in meditation. I meditate all the time, or I don't meditate at all. To me, they've become the same thing. But there were times where I would go for months without ever going out of body, without ever connecting to the non-physical. And I'd wonder about that. But it would always come back. And then I'd spend more and more time in it. And then I'd spend less and less time in it. And those swells, the maxes and the mins would probably be over years. 6 months. 6 months I was this way, 6 months I was that way, or maybe a year I was that way and a year the other way. But they come and go as you need it, as your balance requires it. So if you spend 6 hours a day meditating, you probably could spend more time out in the world. Maybe. It just depends. How useful is that 6 hours of meditating? How much are you learning? Or is it just something you do and it's nice because nobody bothers you and it's simple, and you find the outside world to be stressing and anxiety, and if that's the case, then that seems like you're kind of escaping into the, if that would be the case, it would be like escape. And you don't want to escape. You don't want to run away from something. Those things that make you want to run away are the very things you need to deal with. So as long as the meditation is an escape from the world and being active all the time, having a full schedule isn't escape from being with yourself, and getting into your own mind and evaluating who you are and what you are and why do you do the things you do. Because a lot of people do that. They don't want to be left alone. They can't stand to be in a quiet room by themselves because they might think a deep thought, and that's scary. So they leave the TV on and the radio on and noise going on and chat with people over the phone, even when they don't have anything to say, because they're trying to fill all their time with stuff so they don't have to think about things more deeply, which they would tend to do if they were in a quiet space very long. So people are afraid of both sides and run away to the other side. That's what we want to avoid. We want to avoid making that kind of a permanent or too much in either side. So it just depends on you, Michael, where you are and what you feel like you need to do, and whether you feel like you're avoiding things or running away from things, or whether you feel like you really need to be here. You need the internal work right now.
Yeah, it's funny. When I became a parent several years ago, I stopped meditating. I tried, but it wasn't working well. So I kind of, for a few years, kind of stopped, and was like, but it was always been in the back of my mind, like, oh, you'll come back to it. You'll come back to it. And now I feel like I'm coming back to it and kind of really ramping up. And now I'm kind of on the other side going, oh, how far should I take this? I've been doing Thomas Park, and you say, oh, no more than an hour. So I hit that hour really easily, and I'm like, okay, I got to get out of here.
Yeah. Well, as long as you're not, trying to run from one or hide in the other, then it's okay. But that outside world is where you get to actually try, to use the things you've learned. It's that outside world is where you need to be kind and caring and appreciative, and that love needs to be shared, needs to be, you need to do things, be helpful. That's the world of exercising what you've learned on the inner space. So if you never exercise what you've learned, then the learning is all theoretical and not practical, and it needs to be practical. So yeah, oscillate back and forth. You no doubt will go back to the point where you stop meditating at all for a while, and then you'll come back to it. But that's good. It's like you process all the theory of who you are and what you should be and why you should be that way, and then you go out into the world and apply that theory and see if you really are, that way.
Great, good question. Thanks, Michael. Thanks, Tom. Over to TT. TT has a question.
Yeah. This question is about how to interact with people who are currently in a victim state, so to say. So apart from, of course, working on my own fears that are triggered sometimes, it's also, I wonder sort of, how can I help them? Is it good to confirm or acknowledge how they feel because they feel miserable? Or is it better to try to change subject, or should I try to see their situation and point on things that are positive? Or how would you, what would you say about this?
Yeah, I think the last thing you said is probably the most productive, and that is find things that are positive. Find things in their life that are working or that are positive. And everybody has things that are positive. People who are victims feel like that there's no way I can get out of this. I'm stuck. I'm in this place that is uncomfortable. I don't like it, and I'm just stuck here. And trying to tell them, oh, you're not stuck. You have other options. Lighten up. Go out. Have some fun. And it's, oh no, I can do that. That's not fun. I get with people, and they don't like me, and I don't like them. And find something positive, and just be positive with them. Maybe if you're going someplace or you're doing something that's fun, invite them along. And don't force them to get involved. Just let them hang out with people who are having fun. That might work better than anything else. If you try to talk them out of it, that usually doesn't work and makes it worse. So talk about positive things. Always be positive. They have people that love them. They have people that care about them. And they have a lot of potential and a lot of things they could give to the world. But they just don't see that. So you kind of have to show them without telling them. It's a hard thing to do. That's why being a victim is such a destructive place to be. It's because it's a very hard thing to get out of. It's like being depressed. Well, in a way, it is maybe a form of depression. But when you're depressed, you only see that part of the world that is negative, and all the part of the world that's positive disappears. You can't see it. So a little bit at a time, one little tiny step at a time to something, not necessarily that's happy and joyful, but just not depressed and not miserable.
But do you think is it helpful to not introducing the whole MBT concept, but maybe a little bit of fear work questions, person to sort of derive where it comes from, to ask questions to themselves and see what's
Sure.
behind and so forth.
I think that could be very
Mm.
helpful. Yeah, you could talk to them a little bit about fear, but that's all going to be intellectual to them. You know, it's all going to be intellectual, but it might help a little. Usually the solution is not an intellectual solution. Usually the solution has to be an emotional solution where they get involved in something that is positive. And thing that might work is to get them involved in something where they're giving. Like if they could volunteer someplace, they could go to a hospital and volunteer just to hold preemie babies, or to be part of the, you know, Big Brother, Big Sister program where you find children who are very disadvantaged and they really don't have an adult in their life that's a good role model, that you can interact with those kids and do things with them. Just some place like that where they can help somebody else by volunteering, and getting them to do that so they're not just stuck in their own self-pity may be difficult. But that, I think, would be a good thing if you could connect them somehow to some activity where they could be helpful to others. That might be a really good way to turn them around, because as they're helpful to others, they'd find joy in that. You know, that would make them feel good, because they, you know, there's lots of things you can do. I volunteered a lot when I was a college student. I had time, particularly during the summers. And there's things like adult education. And you go there to this group of people, and that's where, if you dropped out of school and did not get a high school degree and you don't know how to read and write, you're not literate or whatever, or you're just trying to improve yourself so you might get a better job, adults can come there in the evenings and get help. Get somebody that can give them instruction and help them learn how to do math, or, you know, increase their vocabulary or whatever, just learning, kind of adult learning centers. And people are very grateful, you know, where you teach them to read or teach them to do simple math. You know, they may, some of them that I taught, a lot of them were in like their 40s and 50s, you know, but they had time now because as they were older and they wanted to learn these things. So there's lots of places where you can volunteer and be useful. And if you could encourage them to find a place where they could help other people, that might bring them out faster than anything else I could think of right now, because they'd find joy in that.
Yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Thank you very
Wonderful.
much.
Yeah, lots and lots of places to volunteer. I mean, if you just look around in your community, you'll find hundreds of places to volunteer.
Yeah. Good.
Great idea. They could
Yeah.
come volunteer with MBT as well. They need more help over here.
They
course
could
they
come and
can.
volunteer with MBT. Exactly.
Just send us an email.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cue the advert.
Sylvia, nice to see you. Over
Nice
to
to
you.
see you, Vanessa. Hi,
Yeah.
Tom.
Hello. Yeah, Sylvia did a lot of volunteer work over the years. What are some of the kinds of volunteer work you did, Sylvia?
Well, it's been super gratifying because I've managed to take one of the things I'm really passionate about, which is writing and editing. And the thing that I love the most, it's all been about education and kids, which is also a real passion. But now what I do is I help low income students, often where English isn't spoken at home, and I help them either apply to private high schools where they can get full scholarships. So I help them with their applications and writing their essays and all that sort of thing, or first gen college applicants and help them with their college applications. Super fun. I love it.
Yeah.
So my question, Tom, is, as you know, I'm sort of a fixer, and I'm very happy sort of to jump in and, you know, fix things and take care of things. And it's taking me a lot of years to understand that sometimes that's not all that helpful, even though my intentions are good. And you have to really use a lot of wisdom to decide when is the right time to jump in and when it's not. And something that you just said in the previous, not the TT question, but the one before that, about if you're getting annoyed, if you're getting angry, I think, and this is a very specific question, one of the things I've been thinking a lot about is, for me personally, I've realized when I'm annoyed, I'm never in balance. But sometimes anger, I feel like there is a role for righteous anger, like anger at injustice, anger at, and I feel like and maybe you'll tell me I'm wrong, but I feel like I can be angry and still in balance and be like, okay, given what is, it's more of a motivator. Maybe angry is not even the right, maybe that's a vocabulary issue, but just, seeing an injustice and being, okay, I have a small role I can play here and I'm going to play it. And that's very different from annoyance to me. There's a real quality difference to that sensation. Anyway, so I guess my question is is there a role for righteous anger, and can you be in balance with that kind of anger as opposed to reactive anger?
Well, to keep it as simple as possible, I would say no.
Okay.
That righteous anger is, if it's really anger, then I think by definition you're not in balance. Okay. So once you say that, I have anger, but I'm in balance, I would say you're not angry anymore.
Right.
There's no reason why you cannot be passionate about all kinds of things. There's no reason that you can't really get involved and have a very strong interest and strong feelings. Yes, there's nothing wrong with strong feelings, but that's not anger. I think anger means you're out of balance. Anger means you're upset. So let's say you have righteous anger that these people are just a big part of the problem. They just keep hurting other people and so on. And if you try to get involved in that with anger, you'll make things worse, because the people that you're angry with will feel your anger, and it'll just make them, more determined that they're right and you're wrong, and don't push me, and what do you think you're doing, talking, trying to change my mind. And everybody gets more set in their ways, committed to their, to the side that they're on. But if you go to those people and instead of anger, work with them, kind of join with them, and without telling them they're wrong, just show them maybe a better way or how things work better, differently. And that way you can be effective. You can be very effective. But whenever you show up to a problem angry, you generally make that problem worse. And a whole bunch of angry people aren't really very effective, to change things, which is a problem.
I love the distinction between passionate and anger. I think that helps a lot.
Yeah, you can be passionate. Yes. So you can be very passionate about things. Things mean something to you and they're important to you. But as soon as you get the anger, I think you're out of balance. And see, the problem we have, the people see that there's wrongs going on. They have this righteous anger. And the way that they can get more people to join them in their being against this wrong thing is by making people angry. So they use anger to get people to join them. See how awful this is. It's terrible. You should be angry about this. And then you get a whole bunch of angry people, and all it does is make those angry people maybe feel emotionally better, because they jumped up and down and hollered and shook their fist and called the bad people names, but change anything. It doesn't actually create movement in the direction they want. It does just the opposite. Now their enemy is more entrenched than ever, because they've got an angry mob at them. That makes them entrenched. So the way you get people to join your cause is to make them angry, to be angry, and say the kinds of things, rabble rousing, get people stirred up, get them stirred up by their anger. But then you're very ineffectual, can't do anything. So that's kind of the conundrum. How do you change things, and how do you get a lot of people to get involved, but not through anger? get them involved just because they're passionate about change, but they're not angry. They're willing to work with those other bad people in order to help change, make the changes, to get involved.
Yeah, you need to inspire them rather
Yes.
than get them angry.
Yeah. So that's the difference. So no, I don't think righteous anger is still anger and it's non-productive. But passion, sure, there's lots of things you can be passionate about. But when you approach somebody else with a passion, you're not out of balance, you're not out of control, you're not forceful, you're not pushy, you're not demanding that they see things your way. You look at the problem and say, well, how can I best be part of the solution here? And often being part of the solution, instead of shaking your fist and calling names, is to join those people, become one of them, but become one of them with a different kind or more gentle attitude, and be an example of how you can help them get the things that they're passionate about without overrunning other people's free will. I mean, it's not always that way. Join them isn't always the right thing, but it can be. But seeing them as the enemy that deserves your scorn is never going to help any of them see it differently.
Yeah.
So that's the problem. And what we do in our culture is all movements seem to be based on anger. A bunch of people who are angry. And that's why nothing actually seems to ever happen. We've been angry mobs for the last 300 or 400 years about social unpleasantness that we find, and it's still all there. If anything, some of the unpleasantness has even grown. So it's just not effective. That's
awesome.
Yeah, that's the problem with
Tom.
it.
That's so helpful. Gosh, that's amazing. That sort of distinction between anger and passion. I think I was confusing the two quite a bit. And so that's really a good place for me to sort of focus and develop. So that's really, really helpful.
Yeah. Once you have the idea that you can't change people, but you can help them change themselves, that opens up a whole different way of approaching things. You look at these people and you say, well, these people are just wrong-headed and they're doing stuff that hurts, not helps. They're part of the problem. You can't change them, but you can give them a space in which they can change themselves. And often that means you have to work with them. Sometimes befriend them, sometimes, join them, but other times not. Other times just offer up an alternative that will get them kind of to where they want to go without the damage that they're doing. It's all sorts of ways. And you may look at a situation and say, I just don't see any way at all that I can help these people change. And maybe some are like that. You can't always get people to change or even give them an environment to change. Sometimes they're so committed to dysfunction that it's just, that is the way it is. And there's very little you're going to do. They're just going to have to blunder through life in pain and misery until they figure that out on their own. So there's some situations you just have to give up on too. It's not like I am going to change the world, and I'm going to make this change. That then often backfires and doesn't work out so well, because then you get frustrated. And when after your frustration turns into anger, and your anger turns into something that's not very pretty. So you have to do it without frustration. That's difficult, being passionate, being passionate and not frustrated at the same time. But you have to be passionate about things and not frustrated if people don't change.
That was great. And what kept coming, I wanted to share so bad, is Daryl Davis. I don't know if anyone's heard of Daryl Davis. He is a African-American man who befriended the Ku Klux Klan, right? Most people with the Ku Klux Klan, they're so angry, and their response to how they show up is anger. But Daryl, he became curious and befriended members of the Ku Klux Klan. And he even went to rallies. And through his friendship, he helped hundreds of people to step away from the Ku Klux Klan. So it's super inspirational, and I definitely recommend you check out his story. Yeah. Very cool. Okay, I think we're going over now to Alex. Alex, you have a question.
So I've spent a long time thinking about this question of like, in my mind, there's a problem that I see in people, which is that people aren't really fully in control of their decisions, of their behavior. I've definitely asked about this before, and you gave me a question, which is basically the problem is fear, and people have to get rid of fear. You just have to get rid of fear, have an intention to get rid of the fear that creates a problem for you in your life. And I get that, but I can't help but have this idea that it's really difficult for a person to really be in control of all their decisions. And it kind of, I don't like that it is that way. I probably just have to grow up. I don't know. I feel like it sucks to just have to accept that answer. I'm probably not making sense. So let me just give you an example. I look at something like procrastination and I ask myself, like, why are humans like that? Like, how come we're not in control of what we do? Like, how can we, how come that I can want to do something, like I can want to decide to read a book instead of watch TV, or go for a run instead of stay in and eat junk food. Like, there's all kinds of things that people want to do and we can't just do them. It's like we seem to be controlled by random impulses. And I've always been curious about that, and I've always wanted to find out whether it's possible to fix that somehow, through some sort of method, through some sort of trick, through some sort of discipline or knowledge or paradigm shift or something. And I've spent a lot of time thinking about that question, like what could I do to sort of have a solution to that? I feel like I need to be more specific on this. What I mean is, like, I choose to do X and I can just do it. I don't hesitate. I don't stay in my intellect. I just do it. Because I feel like everyone has some idea of what their perfect life would be like. I'd like for things to be this way, that way. And there's all kinds of things that you can do to get there, but you just don't have the discipline or something to just do what it takes to get there. And I've just been obsessed with this question. It's been a couple of years since you gave me some insight on that. And I feel like I'm so stubborn that some part of me doesn't want to accept that your answer is basically just get rid of fear. All the dysfunction, it all comes from fear. Just get rid of that. I have this stubbornness where I want to believe that there's some other kind of solution that I think of as a potential technology where you can teach a Homo sapiens to sort of bypass whatever's causing the problem. I assume that it's something to do with the human brain or mind, something about the way we are, something about our thinking, I don't know, something about the way we evolved makes us be like that. And if we could just have some sort of strange mind hack or whatever, we could fix that. So I guess my question is twofold. The first part is, I'm probably just avoiding life. I'm just refusing to live, deal with the difficult things that everybody deals with. And instead of that, I'm just being childish and I'm being like, no, I don't want to struggle. I just want to fix the problem with tricks, and then everything will be easy. So that's like the first thing. I'm guessing you're going to say, yeah, that's what you're doing. And the second part of the question is, like, do you think that hypothetically anything like that could exist? Should I just give up on it, or is it just completely an ego pursuit? Because I feel like I really don't want to let go of that, but maybe I need to. What are your thoughts on that?
Okay. I'll probably just tell you, all you have to do is just let go of your fear. But I can maybe do a little better than that, Alex. You know, it's you have a war going on between a part of you that wants to get up and go and do things and be things, and another part of you that is one probably afraid to fail, doesn't want to be bothered, just wants things to feel good. You know, it's a matter of feelings. Well, that doesn't feel good. It feels good just to sit here and watch TV. You know, that feels good. There's no stress. There's no potential for failure. There's no potential for injury. Everything is just easy there. I can just sit and become a vegetable, and that's simple and easy. And if everybody would just leave me alone, I could do that and live my life without complaint, you know, without anything else, just me, the vegetable. And then there's another part of you that doesn't want to be that. There's another part of you that wants to get out, be involved, be fit, exercise, read books, you know, learn and grow. And those two parts of you are at war. And the one that seems to be winning all of it is the one that just wants to take the easy road that feels good. Okay, so that battle has been going on probably for a long time. It's not just it's not something just happened last week or last year. It's probably been going on for a long time. And there's, I don't know, there's some probably easy ways and hard ways to go about it. And all the ways I tell you are probably the hard ways, you know, because they're the most straightforward way. Well, just get up and go do it. You know, if you say, well, I really ought to go running. And if you say, well, yeah, I really should, you know, that would be better for me. I'd feel better if I were fit. I'd be a better feeling vegetable if I were fit. Then just do it. Okay, go put on your sneakers or even wear your dress shoes. It doesn't matter. And just go out, and you don't have to run, because if you try running the first time, it won't work out so well. And your legs will be sore, and you'll have all this negative stuff going on, and you'll say, I knew that was a problem. I'm not going to do that anymore. All I got was shins that hurt and feet that hurt and blisters. Just go do something not so difficult. Just go walk fast. You know, put on your shoes that are best for walking, and just go walk for 10 minutes. That's all, 10 minutes. Just walk down to the corner and back, and then watch a TV program. You see, start small, and then maybe next day, you know, do it again, to where it's kind of a routine. Every Monday, you know, after lunch, you go walk 10 minutes, and then it becomes 15 minutes, and then it becomes 20 minutes, and then you're walking faster and faster, and pretty soon you're jogging, and then you're running. So work up on it slowly, because if you try to jump right in the middle of it, you'll convince yourself it is way too much trouble. All you get out of it is pain, and you'll tend to back up away from it because it doesn't feel good. So that's one thing you can do, is don't jump into the deep end of the pool until you've learned to swim. Do things a little bit, but you still have to get to the point that you say, well, all right, I'm not going to go for a run, but at least I'm going to walk down to the corner store, you know, and get a bottle of seltzer water. You know, I'm going to do something, and do that. Except don't just shuffle down there, you know, walk fast, because you're going there anyway. So you try to integrate things like that into your life more and more, but start small and work up, because it evidently is not successful for you to just say, well, I want to change, I'll just change. All right, from now on, I'm not going to do these things. That doesn't seem to work. That other side of you that says, there's a lot of work and it doesn't, isn't going to pay off. And besides, I might fail and I wouldn't be very good at it anyhow. And it takes a long time. I'll just watch TV instead. You know, that part seems to be the winner in this war most of the time. Well, you have to look at the long term too. It's another thing that will encourage you to get up and go, is that look at where am I going to be 10 years from now? What am I going to be doing 10 years from now? And what about 20 years from now? You know, what kind of relationships do I have with people? And you probably will find that where you want to be isn't sitting watching TV, because that doesn't give back much. That doesn't make you feel accomplished. That doesn't make you feel good about yourself. It makes you feel bad about yourself. So if you look and say, well, I want to still be just like this 5 years from now. And the answer is probably, no, I don't even want to be like this now. I certainly don't want to be this way 5 years from now. Well, then it's like, well, then you're going to have to do something about it, or you will be like this 5 years from now and 10 years from now. And relationships, what relationships? See, you can't have relationships if you're watching TV. You can't have relationships if you don't get out of the house. You can't have relationships if you don't go places where people are and engage with them. But if you have a feeling that you will fail, or that it won't work right, or the people won't like you, or it'll turn out just to give you pain, then you are defeated before you start, and you might as well just watch TV, you see? So you need to deal with that part of you that is afraid to go out and do things, and realize that what you're going to be 10 years from now will happen depending on what you do tomorrow. Everything what evolves from where it is to where you want to go. So start small and work your way out of the hole that you're in.
So as far as the second part of the question, which is, I am so unmotivated to just do something that's difficult in little baby steps like that, like start slow, do a little bit at a time. I'm like, no, I want it to be either it's completely easy for me to do it, or I don't want to. It's like I want to find that magic trick that makes a person able to do something easily.
Yeah, easy is probably about a fear of failure, a fear of not getting it right or not being able to do it. So you only want to do things that are easy. That way you will succeed. It's probably where the problem is. Well, you're going to have to do it. There is no easy way to do things that matter. The only things that are easy are things that don't matter much. Anything that matters is going to be difficult. So if you just continue to have to do things that are easy, then you'll only do things that have very little potential for growth and just don't matter much. Everything takes effort and work, and you are the sum of all the choices that you've made. What you are right now is the sum of all the choices you made. And if you don't like that, then you're going to have to make different choices, you know, or you'll be the same. And that's a choice. You have that choice. And if it's hard for you to get up and go because of a fear of failure, or not being good enough, or not being able to learn it, well, you'll have to have the courage to try and see what happens. Because you can't just jump into things and be good at them because they're easy. Life isn't like that. Everything that has value to it has difficulty to it. Typically, the more difficult it is, the more value there is in it. That's just that's just the way life works.
Can I add another little question to that? So I figured that since your perspective is pretty good, because you kind of understand how reality works within different reality frames, right? Like the way humans work in this reality, but maybe there's a different reality where the beings there process things differently. So I thought of asking you, like, I'm so insistent on this idea of finding a trick that makes things easy. And if it's not easy, I don't even want to do it. That, I've always wondered, maybe for humans in this reality, that's never going to happen. This is the way we're programmed. But for a different kind of being in a different reality frame, they evolve differently, where they're able to just make up their mind about whatever it is that they want to do, and boom, there's no resistance. They can just go and do it. And I'm like, yeah, that's the trick. I want to apply that to humans here. Like, I want to find out if we can do that, and like maybe we can all learn to do that. So theoretically, do you think anything like that is even remotely possible for humans in PMR? Or
Absolutely, people can do that. People can do that, and everyone can do that. But mostly the thing that holds us back are things like fear of failure, fear of not being good enough. And they have these basic fears that people have that hold them back. And it doesn't mean you don't have the capacity to do marvelous things. It just means that that capacity isn't actualized because there's fear holding it back. So, there's a lot of very bright people. There's a lot of people with lots of potential, lots of ability, and they don't do much with it because they're afraid. They're afraid that it won't work and afraid that it fails, because if it fails, that would be crushing. If you tried and it didn't work, that would be so awful that it's better just not to try. That's I can't lose if I don't play.
Or what
strategy. But yes, you can just do it. And that's why I'm not a good person to answer your question, because all of my life I've been just the opposite. Anything that I want to do, if it's something I think, I should do this, I just do it. And things don't get in the way. So I have always done that. So when people say, well, I really want to do this, but I can't quite seem to, I have a hard time, being there in that situation, because my experience is just the opposite. Anything I want to do, I can do it. And if I want to enough, there isn't anything that's outside of my reach, and I've always felt that way, even when I was, very, very young. I had no barriers, nothing, no blocks, no barriers. The only thing that was a barrier between me and anything else was whether or not I wanted to, put the time and effort in. And if it was something I wanted, I put the time and effort in. So yes, you can be like that. That's not an impossible thing to be, but you have to have an attitude of can do, an attitude of I can overcome anything, any obstacle.
That's probably another big thing in me. I have this bias, or I have this way of thinking where I imagine that kind of attitude of like hard work, I got to work hard and make an effort, is maybe not healthy. Like, I could be wrong, but I've always kind of looked at it like, that's not spiritual. Like, if you were spiritual, if you were in alignment with if your vibration, your energy, your whatever was spiritually aligned, it shouldn't have to be a struggle. It shouldn't have to be so hard. So I have this bias. I always looked at it like, no, we shouldn't be straining ourselves that hard. But maybe I should have that attitude a little more.
Yeah. Well, the difference there is that if you're doing things that you like, if you're doing things that are taking you where you want to go, then the doing is not a burden. The doing is fun. The doing is a joy. If you're doing things, that you don't like, and doing things that are taking you to a place you don't want to be, then the doing is inappropriate. You should stop doing those things. So there's some of that doing can be not a good thing. People get out and sometimes they get in jobs that they really detest. They'll have a job and they just don't like it, but it's good income and they need to pay the rent and put food on the table for their family. So they do it anyway. So it's something they just accept. That's a pain in my life I'll just have to accept because I need to feed my family. And then they do it because of a good reason. All right, they go to work and they don't have a lot of fun, but it's okay. I have the time after work is where my life is. Some people get into that where they do things that they're not having fun at, but they have a good reason for it. And that's not all bad. Sometimes you get stuck like that, but those people should mostly be looking for another job. They should be going back to school so they can get into some other profession or whatever. You know, they ought to do something about that. And that's kind of a problem. If you're stuck but won't do anything about it, then you have to accept that stuckness and not be negative about it, or you need to do something about it to fix it. So getting out and doing and working hard is a joy when you're working towards something that is good. You see, then the working isn't, oh man, I got to do this and then I do that. It's, wow, I get to do this, I get to do that, and pretty soon I'm going to be to this space that I want to be in. And you find joy in the work. So that's the key, is to find things that you love doing because they're helping you grow, they're helping you become, they're helping you, find and maintain great relationships. You're meeting people, you're connecting with things. Maybe it's not the job at all. Maybe the job is just a job. But there's a lot of neat people where you work, and you have a lot of good relationships with those neat people. And that may be enough. So it just depends on what the work is. You're right. If you're slugging away at something that you really don't want to be doing, then that's a problem. But one way to change that is to quit doing it. The other way to change it is change your attitude to where you do want to be doing it. Or you have a really good reason to do it, like to feed your family, or learn something so you can go be something else. Give yourself skills, give yourself knowledge, give yourself whatever it is you want to do. Maybe you just want to stay home and be a podcast person. Well, you have to know something about the subject, that you want to podcast about. And you have to interview people, and you have to connect with those people, and you have to write a lot of emails, and you have to do things. It's not you have to go necessarily get a 9-to-5 job and punch a time clock. There's lots of things you can do, but you can't do them watching TV. You have to be smart. You have to be prepared. You have to be able to carry on a conversation in that area of expertise where you have that podcast on. You have to know the history. You have to know the background. You have to know all the new things that are happening in that area. And then you can be a podcaster in that area. But there's a lot of work to do. But if that's what you really want to do, then learning all those things is a joy, not a pain. So you need to think of something that you would enjoy and then go do it, be it.
Well, I really appreciate this. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Fantastic. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Alex. Over to you, Jack. You've got a question for Tom.
Hello, yeah. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, Jack.
Hi. My question's about health and how health is related to consciousness and spirituality. I first found your work in about 2015 when I was at a very low point of a chronic illness. And I'd sort of worked out before that point that a lot of my health problems were a direct result of my own mental and emotional state, like negative thoughts, negative emotions. And I knew that I have to change that part of myself to, if I did change that part of myself, my physical health would probably start to improve. So I was going about trying to do that, not very successfully for quite a long time, for about a year or so. And I ended up having quite a dramatic sort of spiritual awakening experience, and it all became clear very quickly. And I thought that my health would improve very quickly after that, because all of a sudden it made sense. I could see all my fears, I could see all my anxieties, my insecurities, and I could let go of them quite easily. I was really surprised by how easy it became in this short period of time. But it's not turned out that way in terms of my physical health. Like I feel so at peace within myself now, and so just comfortable and like not at all anxious like I used to be. But my physical health has improved since that point. This was about 6 or 7 years ago, but I'm still not fully healthy, and I'm finding it sort of quite frustrating. And I sort of feel like because I'm a fan of yours, and I can see all this consciousness side of things. Like, there's so much I want to do in life with regard to helping others and helping the world and that type of thing. And it sort of feels like this is like a waste of time in a way. Like I could be doing so much more, but I'm being held back because my physical body is still not allowing me to get out in the world. Like, I don't have very much energy. My chronic condition was chronic fatigue syndrome, so my energy levels are really low, and there's not a lot I can do. Like, I still have to spend most of the time in the house. So I was just asking if you could think of anything else that could possibly improve my health from what I've said and what I'm doing at the moment. And in a way, it also feels sort of slightly, I sort of feel like, why would the consciousness system create a physical system like this in which a person could get themselves into such a deep hole like what I did physically, and sort of make it so hard to get out of that hole, if you see what I mean. I sort of feel like I've learned all of the spiritual lessons that the illness was trying to teach me, but the illness doesn't seem to be going away, if you see what I mean, completely. So it's sort of like I'm being kept in something that is no longer really serving any purpose.
Okay, well, there's probably still another lesson or two in there that you need to discover and do. So I guess your learning isn't complete yet. You have some things yet to learn. Is your attitude towards your health positive, or do you have this kind of feeling inside your mind that you're stuck with this health problem, and that the health problem is a problem? If you have negative feelings about the health problem, that will help maintain the health problem. If you have positive attitude, then I would go off in a different direction. So how's your attitude concerning your health?
Yeah, same as with everything else. Like, all of the negativity just seemed to be so easy to let go of from that moment that I was talking about when I had the awakening experience. Like, now I don't really even think about my illness at all. I don't think about the symptoms and how bad they are. I just like try to enjoy every day as much as I can. Like, and yeah, I feel so positive, but the illness is just retreating at a very slow rate. It is definitely improving, and when I look back over time, I can see the improvement. It's just incredibly slow. So yeah, I just find it frustrating. That's all.
Yeah. Well, one thing you can do that maybe you're doing it now, but if you're not doing it now, that you could do, your body needs, for it to change, it needs a pressure against it to make it change. So with fatigue syndrome, basically you feel exhausted. And what you'd have to do to get over that is push it. You have to push that body to the point where it starts to get uncomfortable and difficult, and then push it just a little bit further than that. Make yourself do things that are hard and that, that stress your body. Your body tends to change in whatever direction the pressure pushes it. If you sit around and watch TV all the time, and then there is no effort to get up and do, then your muscles get weak and your tendons get flabby and everything, whatever. Now, if you get up and try to run or do something, you get injured very easily because you're unfit. And just the opposite happens. So I would say that when you do get out, and push it, get involved in something, that is hard for you to do. It's very difficult, and do it, and keep working at it, and you'll get better. And that may speed the process up, but it looks like it's getting better anyway. But whatever it is you are doing is putting the pressure on in the right direction. But maybe you could just increase that pressure a little bit on the physical system. It's the use it or lose it idea, about physical body. But in your case, you need to push your body. You need to tell your body, I need you to be able to, walk from here to the grocery store and back in less than 15 minutes. Right now, maybe it takes you a half an hour to do that. So if it takes you 30 minutes, try to do it in 29. And if you can achieve 29, try to do it in 28. And just keep pushing on it for more, and your body will respond to that. Your energy levels, your muscles, and everything will start to respond to that thing. My son got that same ailment, the fatigue syndrome. It's a cousin to the mononucleosis virus, and he got that, and he was so exhausted that just getting up out of the bed, going to the bathroom, he was almost too tired to go back to bed. You know, his exhaustion was just tiny little things like that was all he could do in a day. But he worked himself out of it, and everybody's different. But one of the things he did is he went back to graduate school and first of all, just had enough energy to get through classes. That was a big one. But as he pushed for that, he got better. And then he immediately joined a, what is it called? Lacrosse team. Okay, now he wasn't very good. He wasn't very energetic, but he joined it anyway. It was one of these, it was the Purdue University lacrosse team. And he would try to do workouts with them as best he could. But eventually, that brought him back faster than anything, was that joining the lacrosse team. All right, he was the weak player. They didn't make him play in games generally, but he worked out with them and did his best to stay with them. And in that effort to compete, he got a lot better a lot quicker. So now you don't have to do something like that, but just put some goals to your mind about how long it's going to take you to walk, or how, you should do, how many jumping jacks can you do before you feel like you got to lie down? Well, just next day, do one more than that, and just keep pushing it and see if that doesn't speed up the process. Otherwise, you'll just have to be patient because you are getting better, but you're getting better slowly. So I would say that is one thing. Push the body even into a space that's uncomfortable, and see if that doesn't help. And keep a very positive attitude toward tomorrow. I'll be able to do better. All right. This took me, 15 minutes. Tomorrow, I'm going to do it in 14 and a half, and be real positive about that. And push hard in order to do it in 14 and a half. And if you don't, then, well, I didn't make it this time. I made it in 15 again, but tomorrow I'm going to make it in 14 and a half. So stay positive about it and keep the pressure on both mentally and physically. And I think you'll optimize your rate of return to getting your energy back.
Thank you. Yeah, I did start walking like just before Christmas was the first time I walked a mile for like years, and I've been able to do that consistently since. So I am starting to improve on that side. But it's sort of like, if I push it too far one day, I can make myself feel a lot worse. So I'm sort of wary of not going over that limit, if you see what I mean. So I have to be careful. But I think, I'm doing similar to what you said.
Just
and
push.
One of the main things is it's definitely a lesson in patience. That is one of the things I can see that I had to learn. That is, So I think that's probably one of the reasons it's lasting so long.
Yeah, just figure it's going to take however long it takes, but you're going to push on it to make it get there as soon as possible. And if you can walk a mile, then you can probably walk a mile, and a half. And even if you walk it more slowly to get that half in, and then generally that'll pick up speed. I was a runner there for a while. I did running several times a week, and I found that if you just try to increase your speed, that doesn't work so well. But if you do longer distances, slow distances, then go back to your shorter distance, magically your speed is increased a lot. Whereas if you stayed at that distance and tried to increase your speed, it just wouldn't work. So I was running 7 miles, and I was running the 7 miles in about 50 minutes, about 7 minutes a mile. And I was having a hard time getting through that barrier. I just didn't seem to be able to run any faster than that. So I started running, 10 miles and then 12 miles. Took me a lot longer. I wasn't running as fast. I wasn't running 7-minute miles anymore. But after a few months of running 10 and 12 miles, I went back to 7, dropped like 2 minutes off my. So I think that's just the way the body works. You need to be able to, don't just keep pushing on what you're doing in that way, but go longer, walk further. Even if you have to walk slower, walk further and keep doing that. And that seems to work better in getting your body to improve. Somehow the body seems to have a lot of inertia. It gets to a certain point and it just doesn't want to change. You know, it's like, well, this is good enough. And trying to push it to change, it pushes back and says, no, I don't want to go any faster than this. That's it. That's enough. But you can trick it into doing more by just making longer distance in longer time and then doing the short distance. And suddenly the body finds it a whole lot easier. Why that is, I don't know. I've talked to other runners and they found the same thing. You know, long, slow distance will get you speed at a shorter distance that you just couldn't break that barrier before. So think of that, you know, make it instead of a mile, instead of walking the mile faster, make it longer than a mile and take as long as it takes.
Awesome. We have about 5 minutes left. And
wow, that went by fast.
that did go by fast. I feel like everyone has asked the questions they need to ask. There are a few people who want to ask a second question. So first we have Seabrant. Seabrant, you want to ask your question?
Yeah, thanks, Vanessa. I had another one, but it will take too long. I just tried to do one where we don't have to talk that long. Everybody, you hear me, right? Yes.
That's not your fault, Seabrant. I am notorious for long-winded answers. So.
Yeah, I know, Tom, and it's understandable because I have the same thing with my friends sometimes, and they say, can't you just shorten it in? Yeah, but this is, I know exactly what you're talking about. Now, Tom, my question was, one of my questions, I could talk hours with you. I have so many, but if it's not your experience, it's not your truth, right? And I totally see that. I mean, it's logic. But we're talking about the free will awareness unit. But our IUOC, our individuated unit of consciousness, had so many more experience packages, and it's accumulated all these experiences in our quality. So, and I sometimes have this deja vu feeling that, okay, in this experience package, I didn't have the experience, but I had so many experience packages before where I could have had that experience. I just don't remember it. So if it's not your experience, it's not your truth, is it like from the point of view of the IUOC, or are we talking about the point of view of the free will awareness unit? Because like I said, I have often this, that I know, okay, I didn't have the experience in this lifetime, but I have the feeling I did, although I know I didn't. You know what I mean, Tom?
I do. There is a thing, you know, we're talking about really intellectually here. You know, it's kind of an intellectual statement. If it's not your experience, it's not your truth. You know, and that's true of your intellect. Yeah. If you haven't experienced it, it's not in your intellect. It's, you know, so it's just not your truth. But there also is intuitive truth, that you just intuit. You just know.
Yeah.
All right. You ask a question, you get an answer, and you just know that's right.
Right.
Okay. Right. And that would be something that's intuitive. But you need to be a little careful about intuitive truth, because maybe you got that because that's what you wanted to hear. Maybe you got that because it suited your ego. Maybe you got that for all sorts of reasons. So that intuitive truth has to have some, somewhat qualifications of I think that's true. It seems true, and maybe I'll go forward on the basis of that truth, but I'm going to stay alert and aware in case it isn't. You know, so that's the way I would approach that. But yes,
Right.
there are things that you just know,
Right.
and you don't know where you got it from. Maybe from a past life, maybe just out of the database. Who knows? But yes, a lot of knowing is intuitive. You know, when you remote view, you get the ones that you really nail and you get them almost perfectly before you ever looked at the picture to find out whether you got it right or not. You know,
Yeah, right.
you got it. You know,
Right.
that's typically
Mhm.
remote viewers are like that. When they say, "Oh, I got this one," yeah, I did. They do. And when they say, "I'm not so sure," those are the
Yeah.
ones that they don't get right. So that's that intuitive truth. You just know that this one's right. So yes, there is that too. So you got it on both sides, but I was talking more about the intellectual truth. My book is written for intellectuals and left brain people and the logical process and scientists and engineers and all the other people that do logical process, because there is no on-ramp for them. There is no way that they can get the bigger pictures, you know, that are beyond material. So I kind of wrote it for that group. But I find that an awful lot of the right brain people who are very intuitive, you know, like it too, but they just kind of skip through it. They don't really pay much attention to the book. They listen to the videos more and skip that logical process stuff, and it's fine because they don't need to do that. They've already jumped over that and don't have to go through it.
True.
So I think that's what you're talking about. It's more of an intuitive truth, and who knows where it comes from. But
Yeah.
yes, that happens.
Right. Okay. I could discuss with you a lot more,
Yeah.
but I give the other guys a chance. Thank you, Tom. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Just stay skeptical always.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Tom.
Thanks, Yvonne. Okay, so Leo has a question that I'll read for him. Tom, I know that you don't like to talk much about negative entities, but considering that they do exist, that they sometimes bypass the rule set, and that there is a fear related to them in a big chunk of the population, I was wondering, what else is there that deters these entities from breaking the rules? Are they somehow punished, or is not breaking the rules more of a voluntary thing?
If they are caught, they tend to, I don't know if be punished, I guess, eventually if they keep breaking the rules. But if they just break the rules, they will be taken out of the system. Now, that doesn't mean that somebody, you know, puts them in jail or, you know, shoots them or something like that. Exactly what happens, I don't know, but they aren't allowed to continue doing that. Most of the time that people deal with negative entities, you know, I hear from people a lot where they have negative entities that harass them and talk to them and call them names, and there's this constant, their hair stands up and they feel like things are crawling under their skin, and then on and on and on, all sorts of physical symptoms as well as mental symptoms. And they feel under attack. That usually turns out to be something they've created. The entities they're talking about are entities they've created, and it's created out of a fear, mostly out of a dislike of themselves. This is another part of themselves haranguing them. That's the part that doesn't like them, that's now haranguing them from seemingly outside. Yes, there are beings that live in the non-physical space and they make poor choices, and there are some negative beings there, but mostly they don't interact with us. And in the occasional situation where they do, if they break the rules and you point that out to the system will make them stop, send them back for wherever they came from. Now, if that doesn't happen, I'd suggest that you consider the possibility that it's something you created. It's not, it seems external to you. And if I go in and look at you energetically, I'll actually see it as something external to you. But I also, if I'm patient enough, I can wait there, get rid of it, and watch you put it back, watch you recreate it. So it's there. It's not a big deal. The only thing we have to fear is fear. If you do not fear or relate to these entities in some way, then there's no way they have to influence you. They can only influence you through a connection that you allow them to have. And if you fear them, that's the connection that they have with you. If you fear what they can do or what they are doing, then that's their doorway. That's the portal. If you drop that fear, then they have no way to send you energy. You just refuse to accept it. It bounces off. It's like clicking the X in the upper right-hand corner of your website that you don't want. It just goes away. And unless you make some kind of open that portal to that website, the website can't just force itself into you. And that's mostly the way it is with these beings. They cannot force themselves into you unless you give them a path or a channel in which they can come. And that channel is usually your fear.
Okay, awesome. Great, thank you, Tom. And then over to the last question, Michael, you have a question.
What are politics like in the LCS? Is there a similar theme of progressive versus conservatives, left versus right? I've heard you've mentioned the org structure is more flat, but is it at all democratic at all, or is it purely merit-based? And I mean, given that this is all a process fractal, is there anything we can apply here for our politics and social organization?
Well, for the most part, there are politics. You know, politics do happen there. The political environment is very much based on love versus fear. There are entities that love chaos, and mostly I think that is failed entities who would like to see everyone else fail because it makes them feel better about themselves. You probably know people like that. You know, they don't feel very good about themselves and they like to pull everybody down around them. You know, they like to cause trouble. They just like to create chaos because that makes them feel better. If they look out and they see all these people doing really well, then they feel bad about themselves. But if all these people are in chaos, then it makes them feel better about themselves. Well, there are entities like that just because you have free will. So some entities choose poorly and they de-evolve rather than evolve. And that is mainly what the politics are about. That, and there's some politics involved about the rules and what the rules should be. Like, for instance, trafficking between different reality frames. You know, how much of that traffic is allowable? Is having some entities come from other reality frames, is that going to bias or perturb the results that are already growing there? Is it going to be a problem or an advantage? So sometimes the rules change. Sometimes it's seen as a problem, and other times it may be seen as an advantage based on maybe constraints on what kind of people can go from reality frame to reality frame. So that these kind of rules, and they get negotiated. There's usually more than one side to the story, you know, most like everything else. You know, there's always 5 or 6 ways you can solve a problem, and then which way is best? Which way has the fewest downsides and the largest upsides? And then there's conversation about that. So there's people on either side, or entities on either side of that issue. So there's that kind of thing, but mostly that's done very nicely. You know, the only thing that is kind of in a rowdy political vein is the negative versus the positive. And that is always going to be contentious, just by its nature. That's a contentious thing. So the negative side would like rules such that they could influence say, us here more than they're allowed to do. But if you don't let the negative produce or create influences here, then you also have to disallow the positive to have influences here. So both have to back out to a certain degree. Well, the positive would like to have more influence here, but the negative wants the same opportunities. And then there's a system as well. Do you have to be even-handed or do you not? And those are the kinds of discussions and problems that go. But no, it's not democratic at all. It's so flat, and there's so few players in the discussions that basically whoever is in charge makes the final decision. All the fussing and fuming has to do with trying to convince the person in charge to make a decision that's in their favor. But once the decision is made, it's done, and then they can move on to something else. So it's a
benevolent dictator?
Yeah, kind of a benevolent dictator sort of thing. I call the big cheese a benevolent dictator, and basically the reason that you have levels at all or have management at all is because there has to be rules. And if you have rules, you have to have some way of enforcing rules. Otherwise, you don't have rules, you have chaos. So there has to be a way of enforcing rules. But mostly, that's not a problem. And mostly, there's only one objective instead of 10 or 20 objectives, which makes everything confusing. That's what we have here. We have lots of objectives, but there's only one objective there, and that is the lower entropy. What lowers the entropy in the long term? So that simplifies an awful lot of it. You don't have lots and lots of different places that you're trying to go. Now you have multiple ways to do that, and there's discussion over those. So the person in charge, the benevolent dictator as it was, is mainly got the position of trying to optimize entropy reduction. That's the point. So that means trying to be helpful to those people that are trying to reduce entropy. That's part of it. And if you have beings that are trying to raise entropy, because chaos is very high entropy, then it's a matter of trying to keep that as much under control, have rules that limit what can be done there. And if you're one of those chaotic persons, you don't like rules because you don't like to be limited to what you can do. And then maybe you try to cheat and get around the rules. So you need somebody in charge to see that that doesn't happen. So it's not really like a Congress or a parliament or anything like that, or even a king and a queen and all their royal hangers-on that try to influence them. It's not so much that way either. It is I guess a benign dictatorship is about the right word. But it's not that there's any power. See, our dictatorships are all about power, and keeping power and getting power and maintaining it and getting more power. And that's not the case here. It's not about power. The entity that's in charge has the power of his position, period. He's not going to get more power or less power, and neither are those other entities going to get more power or less power. So there's not a lot of power struggles going on. So the word dictatorship kind of means a different thing here because there's no power struggles involved. There's just struggles in what are the rules and how well are they going to be enforced.
I guess I don't want to take too much time, but I guess what happens if somebody says, "Oh, I want to be the big cheese" or whatever? How does that get? I don't know.
Well, as far as I know, the big cheese is appointed, not elected, and is appointed by the larger consciousness system. So the system wants to pick some entity that'll perform those functions well, which is all about lowering entropy. And if they don't perform it well, then they'll be replaced with something that will perform well. So again, the larger conscious system is a benign dictator in that sense. It gets the final choice. It's its system. But as we know, the larger consciousness system is all about love. It's a consciousness that is well evolved into caring and cooperation and being love and helping. So that's the kind of benevolent dictator you want. One that's not on a power trip, and this is not about power. I think the LCS tried that once a long time ago and realized that trying to force people to be nice and to be cooperative just made them less nice and less cooperative. And you have to let people be the way they are and grow up as they do. And all you can do is give them a space to grow up in and leave them alone. So once it came to that decision, then the dictator became more benign after that. And I don't think it's changed a whole lot. So yeah, it's just the LCS is really the final say. It's the operating system. It's the thing in charge to make sure that the whole system keeps evolving as quickly as it can. So the politics right now, there was a time when the politics were kind of fast and furious there for a while because we had a big cheese that wasn't doing his job very well, and that allowed mischief and so on. But that's many years in the past now, so it's a lot more settled than it was. So as long as the big cheese does his job, then there's really not a whole lot of politics, at least the level that I can see. Who knows what goes on beyond the level where I have vision.
Awesome. That's great. Great question. Good to hear that we got a good big cheese up there taking care of us. So that's reassuring.
Yeah, we do. So everything's working fairly smoothly now. There's just the everyday fussing and fuming over details, but it's not so much at a high level. Before, the dysfunction was at the big cheese's level, and then that was a bigger problem. If you get dysfunction at that level, then it's a lot more serious than if you get dysfunction down at the lower levels, which is where it is now.
Well, we're happy that the LCS selected you, Tom, to be the big cheese for our little reality here. We're in good hands.
For at least for this 2 hours, right? Yeah.
Thank you, Tom.
MBT Events hope you liked this video. We now have well over 1,000 hours of free video on this user-friendly, ad-free YouTube channel. Though these videos are free to our viewers, they represent many thousands of hours in production and editing, and many thousands of dollars invested in video and audio equipment, along with the required computers and software to store and process the raw video into finished products. So far, all of this content has been funded directly out of our own pockets. Be assured, we will always continue to do what we can. It's our life, our purpose, a labor of love that we will continue to pursue as best we can. However, those pockets are not as deep as they used to be. Thus, we are now seeking to augment our resources with support from our viewers. If you find something of significant value in our videos, please consider supporting their production through our newly created Patreon account or through a one-time donation. The links are in the description below. Thank you.